So after reviewing the new JBL Charge 5 and being pleasantly surprised, I thought, hey, let's check out the JBL Bar 5.0 Multibeam soundbar. Now, besides desperately needing a new name, the soundbar itself is actually very solid. It's got support for digital Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision. It's got an Ethernet port. There's a lot going on under the hood here. But the standout characteristic about this soundbar is that it has so much bass, you'd think that there's a subwoofer in the room, but there isn't. Now, when it comes to pricing, the bar itself isn't half bad. It retails for $350 and it's more than enough for a bedroom or small to medium-sized living room. But one important thing to point out here is that it doesn't look like JBL sells a separate optional subwoofer or surround sound speakers to pair with this soundbar so that you can build out your sound system like other manufacturers do, like let's say either Bose or Sonos. Nonetheless, this JBL soundbar is great all by itself, but I just wanted to point it out. Now first, let's talk about the design of this soundbar. It's fairly subtle. We've got a grille on the front with control buttons up top, which are flanked by a pair of perforated grills. Now underneath this grille, there is a hidden display on the right side, which will show you basic information like your volume and source. Now the display panel will power on for a few seconds and then completely shut off, which is good because I absolutely hate when soundbars have a constantly powered on light because it can be very distracting when you're trying to watch a movie. But that's not the case with the bar. This soundbar is strictly heard and not seen. Now, size-wise, the bar has a length of 28 inches, a width of 3.9 inches, and a height of 2.3 inches. Overall, the bar has a small footprint and it's not super thick like, let's say, the Sonos Beam. But finally, there's the power cord. The bar plugs in via an AC port and there's no power brick to worry about hiding. So overall, the bar should be able to fit and disappear in almost any setup. But now let's talk about ports. The bar has two HDMI ports. There's an HDMI in port and an HDMI out port. Now you want to plug into the HDMI out port and connect it to your TV's HDMI ARC port, which is usually HDMI 3 on most TVs. Now I do want to quickly point out that JBL does throw in an HDMI cable with their soundbar, which is nice. And for the best experience, you do want to use an HDMI connection with your soundbar. But if you've got an older TV that doesn't have an HDMI ARC port, there's still an optical port if you need it. Just keep in mind you are going to have to supply your own optical cable if you're actually going to use it. Now regarding this HDMI in port, it's an HDMI 2.1 port with 4K 60Hz video support. And really this port is for someone who's going to be using a 4K Blu-ray player to watch their 4K Dolby Vision content. If you're just going to be streaming your content, then this port is just going to go unused. And finally, there is a USB-A port on this soundbar, and the US version of this soundbar will actually let you play music off of it. But now let's talk about wireless connectivity. This soundbar has Wi-Fi support and it has support for AirPlay 2 and Chromecast. So whether you're an iPhone user or an Android user, as long as your device is connected to the same Wi-Fi as this soundbar, then you can stream music to it from any app. But just keep in mind, your AirPlay 2 or Chromecast connection is contingent on your Wi-Fi connection. So if your soundbar is in an area of the house with spotty Wi-Fi, or if you're just someone that tries to minimize the amount of client devices on your wireless network to alleviate congestion, then you can always just get a wired connection going with this JBL soundbar because it still has an Ethernet port. But if you want to, you can always use a Bluetooth connection with this soundbar. Either you don't want to hook the soundbar up to your wireless network, or you want to quickly and easily share your soundbar with a friend without having to share your Wi-Fi password. Now, Bluetooth connectivity on this soundbar is solid, except if you are trying to watch a video, then there is a noticeable amount of latency, whereas if you were using a Wi-Fi connection, i.e. you're using AirPlay 2 or Chromecast, there is no noticeable latency. But finally, this brings us to the media controls on this soundbar. Up top, you'll find a volume up and volume down button. And personally, I really like when soundbars have built-in media controls, because then this way, you or your guest can adjust your media directly from the soundbar itself and not have to be reliant solely on either your phone or remote control. However, you can only raise or lower your volume with these media controls, which I do feel is very annoying. You can't actually play or pause your music or skip through your music. Now, this soundbar does come included with a remote control, but still, you can only raise or lower your volume with it. But now let's talk about the sound of this soundbar. Regarding speaker setups, the soundbar has a total of 5 oval transducers. You've got your main 3 frontward firing transducers, and then you've got these 2 transducers on either side that are your multi-beam transducers that mostly focus on the higher pitched tones, and they try to bounce sound off of the walls to simulate a surround sound effect. And then there's a total of 4 passive radiators that shoot out the top and bottom of the speaker, which really gives this soundbar a whole lot of wall shaking bass, because its bass has a table to bounce off of, thus amplifying it. And the soundbar has a total output of 250 watts. But just so that there isn't any confusion, this soundbar has support for virtual Dolby Atmos and a virtual surround sound, meaning that it's using algorithm trickery and trying to bounce sound off of surfaces to create a surround sound experience. Now, pro tip, when you first get the soundbar, you do want to go through the Atmos calibration process so that your soundbar can get a feel for the layout of your room. But since the soundbar doesn't have any actual upward firing transducers or any surround speakers, you're not going to get a true Dolby Atmos or true surround sound experience. But nonetheless, the Bar 5.0 is still a very impressive piece of hardware. But so that you can hear for yourself, we're going to jump into a sound test.
Throwing jump. So here, and I'm looking straight at the top. Some structure for us. I get lost sometimes and I can't seem to find a light between the walls I built for myself right in my mind. And then you came over and you showed me love that I never had seen before. Now, when I got you, it's all gonna be alright. Tonight, what a time to be alive. Just you and I. Just you and I. Only you can put the fire out. You can turn it all around. You can lift me off the ground. So we can fly again. So we can fly again.
So obviously, like you may have just heard, anything is going to sound better than your TV's built-in speakers. Your TV most likely just has a pair of downward firing transducers that bounce sound off of the table. Now, besides just not being able to get as loud as a soundbar, your TV's built-in speaker's biggest problem is just going to be the bass. If you're watching a big action set piece or if you're just gaming, if the bass really gets going, then your TV's speakers are just going to become a rattling mess, which not only sounds awful, it's also going to take you out of the viewing experience. Whereas bass rattling isn't an issue for a soundbar, and in general, the bass on this soundbar is its standout characteristic. Since this soundbar has a pair of passive radiators that shoot out the top and a second pair that shoot out the bottom, which then get amplified if this soundbar is resting on a table, the bass on this soundbar will start rattling the walls and floor, almost like there's a dedicated subwoofer in the room. Now, a proper subwoofer is going to rattle your walls even more, but for a self-contained system like this soundbar does have an above average amount of bass for a soundbar of this size and price. Now, bass isn't everything. This soundbar still performs very well when it comes to the mids and highs. Sound signature-wise, this soundbar does like to put an emphasis on the mids, so dialogue is prominent and it doesn't get overpowered by this soundbar's sheer amount of bass. Now, overall, I like this JBL soundbar, except I don't like that it doesn't have a companion app, because these days most soundbars now have a companion app where you can easily adjust their bass, treble, latency, and switch sources all from your phone. Instead, you gotta do all of that with this soundbar's built-in display that I mentioned earlier. Now, it gets the job done, but I still wish there was an app because it is pretty common. But finally, the last thing I do want to point out here is that even though this soundbar is fairly feature-packed, it has Wi-Fi support, and it is a part of the JBL family, unfortunately, you can't pair it up to any JBL Partyboost speakers, which I do feel is a shame. But since it does have AirPlay 2 and Chromecast support, you can pair it up to other Wi-Fi smart speakers or soundbars and get them all to play in sync. But in general, I do wish JBL would just add Partyboost to more of their products, just because Partyboost is so good. So with all that being said, I really like the JBL Bar 5.0 Multibeam soundbar. Besides desperately needing a new name, for me it's very easy to recommend this soundbar. From a sound quality standpoint, the soundbar sounds very balanced but still has a good emphasis on the mids, so dialogue is easy to hear in almost all situations, unless you're watching a Christopher Nolan movie. But like I've mentioned a few times already, this soundbar's standout characteristic is just its sheer amount of bass. Due to the placement of its passive radiators, this soundbar is able to shake your walls and floor and get you really immersed in your content. Now, the soundbar doesn't have as much bass as a proper subwoofer, but nonetheless, it is still very impressive and it should be able to satiate most people, especially in this price range and compact size. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.